Well, let's dive on in. We got 9 undervalued players in today's episode. Before we dive into those 9 players, though, we launched a new YouTube channel strictly for the podcast. The podcast has got to move out of mom's basement. All right. We were posting shorts and YouTube and podcast content all on the same channel. Podcast needs its own channel at this point. So we are running a little bit of a giveaway with this as well. If you're seeing this over on the Fantasy Football Fellas Shorts channel, you'll be able to tell because it says Fantasy Football Fellas Shorts. If you're watching on YouTube, go subscribe to the new channel that is down in the description below. Comment on this video on the new channel, and we are choosing one person who subscribes and comments on each video for the entire month of July. We're giving away a free Fantasy Football Fellas draft guide for every video for one person who subscribes and comments on the video. So if you're not subscribed over there, make sure you do that because we will be moving our podcast content and our live streams strictly over to that channel in the coming weeks. So make sure you do that. Make sure you subscribe over there. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your understanding during this transition as we start to expand and give the podcast a little bit more breathing room. But fellas, let's dive in. We got 9 undervalued players we're going to talk through today, players that we think are actually going to be values at their ADP that will return value on their ADP. Some of the best bargains, if you will. Cameron, I'll have you kick us off here. Who is your first undervalued player in drafts this year?
For me, it's Amari Cooper, and he's a guy I can't stop drafting. In these best ball drafts, I must take him 50% of the time, and I try to limit myself. But every time I'm staring him down there at wide receiver 27, he's best ball sleeper. Doesn't matter. That's the range he's in. I'm just like, why would I not take Amari Cooper? He's been the wide receiver 17 in points per game, both 2023 and 2022, with 15 and 14 and a half in the last 2 seasons in PPR format. With Deshaun Watson last year, he averaged 17.6 fantasy points per game in the 5 games he played with them. 28 receptions on 39 targets for 480 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's a 17-game pace. Obviously, this is just to show. I just want to show relatively. I'm not saying he's hitting these numbers because we're not taking 5 games at 17, but it was 95 receptions for 132 targets, which actually he finished with last year, 1,632 yards and 7 touchdowns. So Watson's using him down the field, and in that stretch, Deshaun Watson didn't exactly play very well. He only had 1 game with over 235 yards, and he only had 2 multi-touchdown games. So it wasn't like Deshaun Watson's out there lighting it up. So you don't really need Watson to come back and be great in order for Amari Cooper to return on ADP. He had a 26% target share on a 14 yards per reception in 2022, and then last year was a 23% target share on 17.4 yards per reception. So he's kind of showing, hey, I can get more targets closer to the line. I can get it done downfield the last 2 seasons. And since 2017, he only has 1 top 20 finish, or one season finish outside the top 20. So if you're getting him at the wide receiver 27, it's probably a pretty good bet that he's inside the top 27 wide receivers. And then, I just want to show you over the last 2 years in Cleveland, these are his worst year. So this was his worst finish of these last 2 years. So in air yards, his worst finish was 7th in 2023. In 2022, he was 5th. In 2022, he had his worst air yard share, which was 7th. He was 12th in deep targets in 2022 after being 5th in deep targets last season. He was 25th in red zone targets last year after being top 10 in 2022. And then he was 15th in yards per route run in 2022 and 2023. So when he's on the field, Amari Cooper is still a fantastic option. And, he's a good NFL wide receiver on a team that is going to continue to use him. So I'm going to be honest, I just don't really understand the disconnect between, the public and Amari Cooper right now as to why he's at the wide receiver 27.
I hear a lot of people talk about, well, Amari Cooper wouldn't have been as good last year if he didn't have his week 16 performance, which sure, take away when a player does good. Of course, they're not going to be great. But I mean, 11 receptions on 15 targets for 265 and 2, your 40 and a half fantasy points in PPR formats. I mean, that was, get you to the championship week. So of course he wouldn't have been as good last year, but again, that's what Joe Flacco, right? We're looking at Deshaun Watson potentially being back, and it seems like if Deshaun Watson stinks, that's already being factored in at his ADP here. Yes. What if Deshaun Watson is competent at best? Yeah. Where's Amari Cooper end up then? Are you in on Amari Cooper this year, Ty, at his ADP?
At his ADP, yeah. I do kind of understand the concerns that some people have that it could be inconsistent this year, or what is the week to week upside, right? And I think a lot of people, if they are going to go back to last year and say, like, again, that week, what was it, week 16 matchup that actually won me a matchup in fantasy against Cam. It's a little ironic here.
Yeah,
um
that one hurt. That one hurt.
that was fun to be on the winning side of. Um, I do understand where people can question what that week to week upside is, but the fact is, when you are looking at other wide receivers that are going in front of him and around Amari Cooper, it's like, you know what you're getting with Amari Cooper, right? And even with the small sample with Deshaun Watson, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad to like punish him for going now 10 spots lower than where he was last year in terms of his finish, right? So I think people are overcompensating for like how bad Deshaun Watson was last year. And instead of asking the question, like you said, Luke, it's like, what if he's competent? What if he's average? What if he's on the off chance above average, right?
Definitely.
You look at the tier, this massive tier of wide receivers. Again, we're going to bring up this massive tier for so many guys. And it's this massive tier of basically, Debo Samuel at the wide receiver 15. I'll say Jaylen Waddle at the wide receiver 16, maybe. Mike Evans 17. Probably more so Mike Evans at wide receiver 17. To basically Tank Dell, the wide receiver 29. Yeah. Any of these guys could finish as the wide receiver 15 or better, or they finish right at their ADP. So he is a part of this massive tier where Amari Cooper seems like if Deshaun Watson isn't putrid, it seems like Amari Cooper could be one of the best guys in this range to climb up into that top 15 range.
Definitely.
We'll talk about another guy who's going in this range of wide receivers. He's actually going only one wide receiver after Amari Cooper. Tyler, who is your first undervalued player?
It's T. Higgins. We had briefly mentioned him on our live stream that we just did yesterday, doing an underdog draft, where you can't talk about T. Higgins without at least acknowledging the fact that, like, we are not necessarily sure what the Cincinnati offense could be like with Joe Burrow coming back from his wrist injury and stuff. But when it comes to T. Higgins, and let's say that Joe Burrow is going to come into the season 100% healthy, we've been asking, can T. Higgins take the next step to command more targets in this Cincinnati offense? And we finally have an answer. The answer is that there are more targets available, and he doesn't need to take that step because, again, there are targets available. There's 188 vacated targets in this Cincinnati offense with Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, and I throw in Irv Smith leaving too, because like Irv Smith was technically supposed to be like their tight end one last year.
Sure.
I doubt Tanner Hudson is going to see 50 targets again this year. So I'm just going to round it up to say 200 vacated targets in this offense that were only replaced by adding Zach Moss and Jermaine Burton. Nice little players, but I don't necessarily see them taking a huge chunk of that allotted amount away from guys like Jamar Chase, who already accounted for 145 targets last year just by himself. So again, there's more targets available for T. Higgins, right? And this is by far the lowest that he's been going in drafts since his rookie year in 2020. He was going as the wide receiver 74 in drafts in his rookie year. Next year, he was the wide receiver 24, wide receiver 12, wide receiver 14. And yes, last year was an abysmal year. But now he's going as the wide receiver 28. It's not like last year was T. Higgins' fault. Like, the entire Cincinnati offense just had a horrible string of luck and just a bad season overall. It was not just T. Higgins. So to me, it just feels like we're punishing him too harshly with this ADP. And for a guy that does have some history of finishing as a fringe top 15 wide receiver on a per game basis, where he was the wide receiver 14 and wide receiver 16 in points per game in 2021 and 2022. This is one, again, you have to acknowledge that there is some risk that maybe Joe Burrow doesn't come back healthy and that this offense isn't the same. But on the chance that Burrow does come back healthy, there's a chance that Higgins can absolutely smash this ADP.
Higgins was the wide receiver 12 in fantasy points per game back in 2021. Now I understand that was Jamar Chase's rookie season, right? So obviously, you're breaking into Jamar Chase a little bit, but T. Higgins has shown he can be a fantasy relevant piece that is worthy of being on your team and not, being drafted in this upper end flex range of wide receivers. The Bengals also passed at the third highest rate in the NFL last year, nearly 62% of the time they threw the football. And I know Brian Callahan is now in Tennessee, but they still hired in-house. They brought Dan Pitcher up as their offensive coordinator, former quarterbacks coach for the team. And as long as Zach Taylor's still there, like, this is a team that's going to be throwing more than they're running. I want to talk about Jermaine Burton, but I want to get your thoughts in here too, Cameron, before we figure out how these targets can actually be distributed.
Yeah, when you look at it, Joe Burrow is, when he's healthy, is a top 5, quarterback in the NFL. 4,600 yards, 34 plus touchdowns, each of the 2 years before he got hurt. Like, that can easily bring, 2 wide receivers top 20 for sure, can get 2 wide receivers top 15 in points per game. So the upside is definitely there. And I think I've been agreeing with you, Ty. I think we're just punishing him so much for how bad the team was last year when it shouldn't be. And that's where we got to take advantage. That's where we got to just realize this is this huge tier. I think this is just what we're going to talk about the rest of the summer of this guys in this tier. Like, if we can nail this tier, right? I mean, you're going to have a very deep team with, you could have 3 or 4 top 24 wide receivers on your team. And T. Higgins is one of those guys that, if I'm going to take a chance on any of them, give me that upside of T. Higgins. And he's already proven it. And it's not like T. Higgins is this ancient wide receiver either, right? The guy's still so young. So, I mean, he's only getting better. He's in the contract year. I mean, there's just so much pointing to T. Higgins returning to the norm that it's like, why are we punishing him all the way down to the wide receiver 28?
Because he can't stay on the field. But
that is a huge part of it. That is exactly what it is.
But again, you're baking that into this wide receiver 28 ADP.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, everything's baked in now.
Yeah, everything is baked in already. So you are drafting T. Higgins at, I mean, again, he was a wide receiver 40 in fantasy points per game last year, so it can get lower than this. But again, we're kind of throwing the nightmare season out for the Bengals here, because literally anything that could have gone wrong did go wrong last year. Mm-hmm. I do want to talk about Jermaine Burton and this redistribution of targets you brought up, Ty, because I think a lot of people will say, okay, the departure of Tyler Boyd, Jermaine Burton is soaking up all those targets. How many targets do we think Jermaine Burton actually gets this year?
I'd say like 80, somewhere in like 80 to 85.
What do you have him down for, Cameron?
I'm in the same range. I think I'm just below 90.
I believe I have him sitting. I am pulling up my numbers for him as we speak. And now, where is he? Why can't I find him? I have him down for just around 90, if I'm remembering. I have him for 91 targets. So, sure, he might take all of Tyler Boyd's targets. But as you said, Ty, there's still another
110.
52, right. Right. There's still another 70 plus to go around in this offense. And so Jamar Chase will get his. There's room for T. Higgins to see an uptick in his target share. T. Higgins should be looking at a 19-20% target share this year, which for me puts him into the top end of this range of wide receivers. He's currently my wide receiver 15. Cameron, he is your wide receiver 24, but I think you've mentioned there's definitely room for upside within that tier. And Ty, you have him up at wide receiver 16. So we're all in agreement there. T. Higgins, great value, plenty of upside there. This Bengals offense should bounce back this year. I'll move on to my first guy who I think is undervalued. It's a guy who I've talked about quite a bit. I've talked about him ad nauseum at this point, but I think it's going to be me and only a handful of other people who are going to keep screaming from the mountaintop that Alvin Kamara is such a value at running back 17. It feels like we're just getting name fatigue with him, right? Where it's like, well, he's not as young and exciting as the Rashad Whites, as the James Cooks, as the Isaiah Pacheco's, right? He was the running back 3 in fantasy points per game in PPR formats last year. He was second in expected fantasy points per game last year. And maybe the easiest way to talk about Alvin Kamara is to just debunk the main arguments people are using to fade him to this average draft position of running back 17. The number one reason I keep hearing from people, Kendre Miller is going to chip into his work. I'm not super concerned about that, considering Kamara was 21st in rush attempts per game last year, and we know mass rushing volume has never been his forte, because he saw 240 attempts 2 years ago and 223 last year, which then leads people to the argument of, well, see, he hasn't been efficient despite getting all the volume. Cool, great. I've known this already. And you want to know what it's done? He's finished as the running back 3, the running back 14, and the running back 4 in fantasy points per game, all ahead of his ADP, and 2 of them are way ahead of his ADP. Well, he doesn't score touchdowns. Great. I also knew that. Yet he still put up these upper echelon running back numbers in fantasy points per game. And the last one, he hasn't played a full season in 3 years, which, to be fair, I mean, 3 of his 4 games missed last year were due to a suspension, so let's not hold that against him. But at this point, it's surprising that any running back plays a full season, because they are quite literally playing human bumper cars out there. Like, and I wouldn't even say bumper cars. We could probably even say, like car crash simulator at this point, the way they're constantly being thrown, against 300-pound linemen. So that leaves us, after debunking all of these, with an elite pass catching back whose team upgraded their offensive coordinator this offseason, that's being faded to the running back 17 because of what? The potential threat of lost rushing work, which he hasn't needed in the past in order to produce in fantasy. You could have even cut his rushing production in half last year, and he still would have finished as the running back 14 in fantasy points per game. Alvin Kamara is by far one of the easiest values to pinpoint in drafts right now, and people just don't want to draft him because of Kendre Miller and name fatigue.
I think too, it's the worry that he's this year's Austin Eckler, right? Because last year Austin Eckler, the year before, 21 fantasy points per game, comes out. But it's the worry that you get an injury and you just never, like Eckler hurt his hamstring, and when he came back, he didn't even look like this. He looked like a different running back. I mean, it was hard to watch when he came back from it. So I think that's the biggest worry with Kamara, right? He's getting to that edge. The difference is, though, that you pointed out, Austin Eckler was propped up. I mean, he was great receiving back. Don't get me wrong, but his fantasy finishes were like 18 touchdowns, right? It was that kind of. Whereas Alvin Kamara, he hasn't scored many touchdowns. He just has a quarterback in Derek Carr who checks down more than any other quarterback like we've seen over the past couple of years. I mean, it's just one after another. Any sign of pressure, he throws it to his running back. So as long as that stays, I mean, there's no way he doesn't, produce at least to the running back 17. He's one of those guys that you talk about. They say, okay, if you want to knock off everything and cap any upside, that's fine. But you're still drafting him at his floor. Like, even if you get rid of the upside, okay, at worst, he's the running back 17, and you're taking the running back 17. That's a pretty good bet.
At worst, right? It's a phenomenal bet, because at worst, you're getting the running back 17, and you're not spending the first overall running back pick on him like you were with Austin Eckler last year.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? If the floor falls out from underneath Kamara, fine, I'll own it. But this is just classic name fatigue and like worrying about a guy who may not actually chip in as much as we're expecting him to. Ty, chime in here on Kamara. You back in this? You're going to play devil's advocate. What stance you taking?
No, I absolutely back it. I mean, I'm going to pull up our rankings here. He is my running back. Let's see. He's pretty high. He's my running back 11. Cam, he's your running back 14. Lucas, you're the highest. You got Kamara as your running back 7. Ooh. What is the main reason for having Alvin Kamara on your team? Like, what does he give you that other running backs do not give you? It's receiving upside. And just like how rushing upside is a cheat code for quarterbacks, receiving upside is a cheat code for running backs. If there's one thing that will not get taken away from him, if Kendre Miller is more involved with Clint Kubiak coming in with a new offensive system, if there's one thing that will not get taken away from Alvin Kamara, it's his involvement in the passing game. So again, kind of to what you were saying, Cam, like his floor is kind of where we're drafting him. Even if he's the running back 20, you know that you're still going to get great receiving work from him. So I'm a fan of the argument. I'm so in on Alvin Kamara at this ADP. People can be worried all they want about Kendra Miller. Like, I just think that's kind of foolish. I'll just say it.
Second in targets and receptions among all running backs last year, despite only playing 13 games. I think that should tell you something about his involvement, even with Clint Kubiak coming over from the San Francisco 49ers this offseason too. Again, is certainly an upgrade from the offense that they were running last year. Watching film on that is
Abysmal.
I swear for this episode, I watched some terrible offensive film, and it was. I'll just say I'm glad I'm done watching it at this point. Let's take a quick break here, fellas. We'll be back with 6 more undervalued players after. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, where it is best ball summer. There are 5 core best ball tournaments to play in with over $20 million up for grabs this summer. You can even take a crack at winning the top prize of $1.5 million in their infamous Best Ball Mania 5 contest. To enter, head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app and use the code FELLAS to get a first deposit bonus up to $250 and our 2024 draft guide for free. Again, head to UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app and use code FELLAS to sign up. Must be 18 plus and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-522-4700 or visit npcgambling.org. Alrighty, we are back. Talked about Amari Cooper, T. Higgins, Alvin Kamara thus far. We've all been in relative agreement on these players. Look, so I think it's fun when we get to debate sometimes on these episodes, but Cameron, unfortunately, you're going to be talking about a guy here that, again, if I'm screaming from the mountaintop on Alvin Kamara, I think all 3 of us will be screaming from the mountaintop about this next player.
Yeah, it's crazy to me because I felt like I was so high on this player. Oh, Ty changed his ranking on him, so I guess he is a little. So me and Lucas are a little higher than Ty. But it's Kyler Murray, and man, you want to talk about a guy who's getting disrespected in fantasy football right now? It's Kyler, and it's absolutely crazy. He's going as a quarterback 8 on Sleeper. He's a quarterback 9. I mean, it's just crazy that a guy whose floor for any season he's ever had is 18.3 points, and that includes points per game. That includes coming back off a torn ACL as a rushing quarterback, where he averaged 18.9 fantasy points per game last year. Just for reference, Patrick Mahomes' worst season so far as a starter, he had 18.1 fantasy points. So Kyler's worst season is better than Patrick Mahomes' worst season. And if he would have averaged 18.3 fantasy points last year per game, that's the quarterback 8, which again is where you're taking him. And that's the biggest argument right now is, okay, you're taking him at the floor, and he's also finished as a quarterback 1 overall. So, there's quite a bit of upside, but he adds Marvin Harrison Jr., who at worst is still an upgrade over everyone they had last year. He has Trey Benson, and then Trey McBride gets another year. And last year he was still averaging, like I said, he came back halfway through the year off an ACL tear, still averaging 5.5 rush attempts a game, 30 rushing yards, almost 6 yards per carry. And he had three rushing touchdowns in 8 games. That's a 17-game pace at 93 attempts for 581 yards and 6 touchdowns. It's him, Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and maybe Anthony Richardson that have the potential to hit 4,000 passing yards, 25 passing touchdowns, 500 rushing touchdowns, and 500 rushing yards, and 7 rushing touchdowns. Right. And that if he hits that, that's a top 5, most likely a top 3 fantasy season. And Kyler's flirted with that multiple times so far throughout his career, having 3 seasons above 3,800 or 3,700 passing yards. So he's a guy that can get it done through the air, and he gets it done on the ground at a high enough clip that it makes it worth it in fantasy football, right? And that's what we got to continue to realize. You can argue with me all day long and tell me that CJ Stroud is a better NFL quarterback than Kyler Murray. It doesn't matter, because in fantasy football, you're rewarded for running the ball. So that is why I have Kyler Murray ahead of CJ Stroud in my rankings right now, because the way the points add up, Kyler Murray does the things well. He runs the ball, he gets passing yards, and he's able to, find the end zone either through the air or on the ground.
5 of the last 7 quarterback 1 overalls have had at least 95 rush attempts in a season. And you brought it up, Cameron. I mean, this guy is knocking on the door of 95 or has surpassed 95 in almost every single year of his career. Ty, you brought Kyler Murray down in your rankings. Primary reason for that? You still like him at ADP? Chime in here.
1,000%. Still love him at ADP. I just realized that like having Kyler Murray ahead of a guy that I've said that I like more than him didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And so I went back and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna tweak some things here. And sure enough, like the way that it was before the change, Kyler was my quarterback 4, Richardson was my quarterback 5, Mahomes was my quarterback 6. Now it's Richardson 4, Mahomes 5, Kyler 6. And I really still see them as like any, if I'm in a range with those 3 available, I'm a pretty happy camper. But for Kyler specifically, I don't think people appreciate his situation.
Mm-hmm.
Arizona's offense is much better than it has been the past 4 seasons.
Yes.
Okay. Like Marvin Harrison, yes, like you said, Cam, at worst is an upgrade over everyone that they had last year. I have jokingly said, like, Zay Jones is a great number 2 guy to have in this offense. Michael Wilson, developmental guy that I was a big fan of coming out in the draft. Trey McBride, Trey Benson, James Conner. This Arizona offense is much better than people perceive it to be. And guess what? That's a great situation for a quarterback to be in. You brought up CJ Stroud, who's the point guard for Nico, Diggs, and Tank Dell. He's going to be able to support those guys. Kyler can support all these guys, and on top of that, he adds a rushing upside. Like Kyler Murray is one of these guys. Again, I think he's just always going to be disrespected because people don't rate him highly as an NFL quarterback. But when it comes to fantasy, he's going to put up points. He's going to produce in ways that other quarterbacks don't, and those guys are still going ahead of him.
I'll tell you for sure this season, Kyler Murray is going to be phenomenal. He's going to return on his current ADP, but you're going to have to bench him around October 25th because that is when Black Ops 6 comes out. So, you're going to want to bench Kyler Murray.
Higher rushing upside because he's not going to know the defense.
Yeah, true. Won't have studied his film. He'll be scrambling quite a bit that week. So maybe you don't sit on that week, but October 25th, just mark that on your fantasy calendar and make sure you have a backup plan ready to go potentially. No, jokes aside, Ty, your next value or undervalued players.
Yeah, you're cheating over here. What the heck?
Too really special.
Freaking cheater.
Unreal.
You're not invited to my party because you cheated. Look, you got 2 players here, and I'm fascinated to hear your case on one of them. I actually agree with you on one of these players, but I think there is a case to be made here that actually both of these players are values for where they're going.
Yeah, there's nothing like talking about a 29-year-old running back with over 2,000 carries to his name in his career and a 26-year-old running back that has not stayed healthy in his career and has not had more than 100 carries in his career. Yeah, it's like Dallas Cowboys backfield. It's Zeke and it's Rico Dowdle. I get, again, 29 years old, 26, injuries, tread on the tires, all those things. I get it. And on top of that, Mike McCarthy has outright said that this is a running back by committee. That was all the way back in May, right? Like that is just objective fact at this point. But these are the 2 guys that are filling in the ginormous hole left by Tony Pollard's departure. And Tony Pollard last year had 250 rushing attempts. He finished with over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. And he was also top 10. There was a stat that I heard from Josh Norris on the Underdog Football Show. He was top 10 in carries inside the 10. And it was just a shame that Tony Pollard just did not come through on those, because if he did, he would have been a top 5 guy and he would have returned on his draft capital, but he didn't. That's
Still salty about that?
Yes, very much so.
I've moved on, but I understand what you have.
I know most people have, but I still hold a lot of resentment towards that. Along with the rushing work, though, Pollard did have 55 receptions and 67 targets for 300 yards. This Cowboys offense, despite losing Tony Pollard, but still keeping most of their weapons and Dak Prescott, they are still projected to score a ton of points, no matter whose projections you look at. According to Hayden Winks' projections, also on the Underdog Football Show, he's got Dallas first in projected plays per game and 8th in projected points. I'm sorry, Dak Prescott is not going to be throwing the ball 50 times a game. There is no way that the offense can sustain that. There's no way that a quarterback can go through that much utilization in a season. So honestly, yes, I know Zeke is getting up there in age. A lot of tread on his tires. Rico Dowdle is a pretty unknown commodity at this point. But these price tags aren't going to last long when we know that this offense is going to score and have a ton of plays. And as soon as we hear a piece of news in training camp that like Zeke is looking to be the lead back or that Rico Dowdle is looking to be the lead back, you're going to see these guys' ADPs just soar, right? So if anything, you want to keep this on the on the down low. You don't really want to like talk about how much you love this Cowboys backfield. But I love where they're going with where their team's projections are. We know that this offense will put up points. There's a ton of touches available for these guys. I'm going to get one of these guys, and I do not care, again, with who they are as players, because they're going in the middle of the 10th round, in the middle of the 12th round. There is such low stakes with these guys taking them as a depth piece, and the payoff can be massive.
The top 10 carries side of the 10-yard line is so big. It is so important for this duo, because you're right. This offense, it's high powered. They are going to be in scoring position. Someone has got to score the rushing touchdowns on this team. My money's on Zeke. I mean, do I have Zeke the highest ranked out of all of us? Like, I have Zeke as a top 30 back this year.
I think so. I think it was you guys had Zeke as your running back 29. I had him as my running back 33. There it is. I've got Rico as my running back 36. You guys have him in like the mid 40s. So like we probably have Zeke ahead of ADP, but we've all got Rico Dowdle right where his ADP is. And I think we can all admit he could absolutely smash this ADP again if he emerges as this lead guy.
Yeah, I could bring Zeke down to the running back 32 range and bring Rico up to the running back 38 range. Like, you fork a few carries, a few targets and receptions over to the other guy, and very quickly they start to balance out. But what I can conclude is that they're both going to be ahead of ADP for me. But like, I look at my stats for Zeke, I don't have him hitting 700 yards this year, but I have him scoring 8 touchdowns, because somebody has to. Somebody has to score the rushing touchdowns for this team. And it's not going to be Rico Dowdle. I think Zeke is going to be more of the thumper with whatever juice he has left, but someone has to. It's a disgusting running back room, Cameron. And again, we both have Zeke and Dowdle ranked around the same range. Do you share the same sentiments here? Again, the people probably just vomited off the side of their chair. Hopefully they weren't driving and now you got vomit all over your steering wheel, whatever it is, if you're listening in the car. But it's not a fun room to talk about, but it seems like based on your rankings, Cameron, you're in agreement here.
Yeah, it doesn't take much to outperform running back 38. Like, let's get that, let's get that out of the way first, right?
Yes.
Like, it's not like we're asking for a ton. And Zeke, what he did last year, I mean, Zeke had 185 rush attempts last year on the New England Patriots with Ramondre Stevenson there. Zeke had 65 targets last year, right? I mean, Zeke was a top 30 running back in PPR formats. He just obviously didn't have any, he only had 5 touchdowns and he only averaged 3.49 yards per carry.
Not great there, but hey.
No, but
not great, Bob.
Behind this Dallas running, it's not like he's going to do worse efficiency wise. And it's not like, and the other thing too, is you don't really have to worry about one of them taking over. Rico Dowdle and Zeke aren't good enough where all of a sudden the other one's just going to disappear and fall off the face of the earth, right? I mean, they're both going to be pretty good. And it's kind of like a budget Pittsburgh Steelers running back room right now. Like, and then you kind of look at it too and you go, which team's going to score more points? Dallas Cowboys or Pittsburgh Steelers?
Yeah.
I don't really think that's close. I'm going to be honest. And so even if there is more of a discrepancy where obviously, the Pittsburgh scores more rushing touchdowns. Dallas, it's probably going to have with the same amount like rushing touchdowns total between those two teams, split up, just because Dallas has scored more touchdowns in general. So I don't know. It's interesting to look at it like that. He would definitely be one where, if he's your running back 3 and you're plugging him in, don't watch. Do not,
Don't
because he will probably run it 15 times and get you 45 yards and hopefully fall in the end zone with 3 more catches. And then you look at your box score and be like, oh, I got 14 points from Zeke. That's pretty awesome. But if you watch that game, you're like, holy cow, he might be the worst running back in the NFL.
You can watch for CeeDee Lamb. You can't watch for Zeke.
Yes.
But as I'm like, as I'm thinking about the guys who I regret not being more vocal on James Cook last year. I had James Cook as a top 24 back, despite the industry being much lower on him. And I regret not being more vocal about James Cook, because that would have smashed last year. I'm starting to wonder if Zeke is one of those guys that, like, maybe I should chime in about Zeke a little bit more and say, maybe there is a bigger opportunity here than we realize. Maybe there is a chance that he ends up being a weekly plug and play running back 2 for your team. I'm going to talk about somebody more exciting, a lot more exciting than Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle. Hey, look, nothing against you there. I know you made a face there, but nothing against Zeke and Rico Dowdle. All I'm saying is that DK Metcalf is a much more fun name to talk about than both of those two guys. Now, people will say, well, Lucas, he's going as the running back 21. He's been the wide receiver 22. I said running back 21, the wide receiver 21. He's been the wide receiver 22, 24, 20 over the last 3 years. Like, this ADP, it makes perfect sense. The thing we're not looking at here, though, is that those 3 years were all with Shane Waldron as his offensive coordinator. Now we get Ryan Grubb running the Seattle Seahawks offense this year, who ran one of the most fun offenses in all of college football last year. Well, really the last 2 years with the Washington Huskies. They were 9th in pass rate. They were 4th in deep pass rate in 2023 out of all college football teams. So essentially this team threw the ball a ton, and they threw the ball deep a ton. And DK has already noted how much he loves how explosive Grubb's offense is and how Grubb wants to push the ball downfield. And it makes sense, because this plays right into DK's skill set. I mean, he has finished top 12 in both air yards and deep targets each of the last 4 years. Now, I get you still have Tyler Lockett there. You've got Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is, on the up and up. But Seattle never finished higher than 15th in pass attempts per game under Shane Waldron. And I'm expecting this team to be top 10 in pass attempts per game this year. So I am very bullish on the Seahawks pass attack, and I am expecting DK to be more of that Rome Odunze kind of player that Ryan Grubb utilized during his time with the Washington Huskies.
Yeah, I think we forget how good DK Metcalf is at football. Like, I mean, he is just
Can we pull up the photo? The draft photo? The one, his shirtless photo? People will go nuts over that again.
He is just unbelievably dominant. I mean, we were at the point where there were people who were trying to compare him to Calvin Johnson go after year 2. Like that he never lived up to it. And I mean, he never should have been compared to Calvin Johnson. Let's get that straight. But that was the path that he was on, and that's how dominant he has been. Obviously, these last 2 seasons have been, a little more down from a fantasy perspective, but DK's still been a very good wide receiver. And like you said, now you get an offense where they're going to throw the ball more, where that's going to be a focal point, where they're going to, work to get DK open, work to find him in the red zone more. Yeah, that's right up DK Metcalf's alley. That's a lot to be excited about for DK. I agree. I don't think I'm as high ranking wise on DK. I think I still have him as a wide receiver 22, but he's another one of those guys, right? I have Deontay Johnson right behind him at wide receiver 23. Well, Deontay Johnson's ceiling for me is wide receiver 23. DK Metcalf's floor for me is wide receiver 22. Like, that's the difference, right? Because you're going to just have guys rank. So I'm still in on DK. I still think he can be fantastic this season.
I've got DK as my wide receiver 23. That's most definitely a floor. And before I had even revised their stat projections, I'm pretty sure I had DK Metcalf as a top 15 wide receiver. And we had a hot takes episode right when the draft guide got released. I'm trying to remember who I had. I had DK Metcalf ranked
than Marvin
ahead
Harrison
of.
Jr.
Boom,
It was
there
ahead
it
of Mark.
is.
I fell out of my chair.
You did. And I think that's a little extreme, but at the same time, maybe it's a possibility that we have some rookie struggles coming from Marv. Seattle just hits the ground running and they become, a top 12 offense. Like, I'm just saying, like, DK Metcalf, I'll maybe the best way to say it, DK Metcalf is going in like the 4th round based on consensus ADP right now, like early 4th round. You're telling me I could get DK Metcalf as my 3rd wide receiver on my team with that kind of upside? Come on now.
Yeah.
What's crazy is Geno Smith too. I think it's easy to dog Geno Smith. He's actually been the quarterback 1 in completion percentage, overall completion percentage since taking over the starting gig in 2021. That's per Hayden Wings over Underdog Fantasy. Again, you get this offense that's going to push the ball downfield, that is going to want to utilize its athletic, high upside wide receivers, a DK, a JSN. You're going to get a lot more 3 wide receiver sets out there. You're going to look for this team to push the ball down the field, keep the ball moving. And when they get into the red zone, Ryan Grubb isn't going to be afraid to throw it. Again, DK Metcalf hasn't finished lower than 11th in red zone targets as well in the past 4 years. So not only do you get big play upside, not only do you get red zone opportunity as well, at the worst, I think you get consistency. You get 1,100 yards and 7 or 8 touchdowns, which is going to be good for a top 24 wide receiver. So you're drafting DK at his floor. 100% agree. Reason why he's undervalued for me is because he's currently my wide receiver 14. I have him 7 spots ahead, or 7 wide receivers ahead of where he is currently being drafted. All right, let's land this ship, fellas. We got one more round to go through here. Cameron, we're talking about another guy now in this, again, this massive tier of wide receivers. And again, when we look at this tier, it's pick your flavor, basically. And I think you can make a case for a lot of these guys that they're undervalued. Some I think are probably being appropriately valued, but again, there's a lot of agreement here today. There is a case for this player. The more I sit and think and digest this wide receiver room, there is a very, very strong case for this player.
Yeah, I if you've listened to the show, you're probably thinking it's Deontay Johnson. But unlike Lucas, I'm trying to like switch it up episode to episode, not just talk about the same player and over and over.
Oh,
again.
hey, yo, I only brought up Alvin. This is the first time I've talked about DK Metcalf this year.
I was coming after you for Alvin Kamara. So
I know that I realize.
So
you think I am
that's why I'm talking about Cooper Kupp. So just know Deontay's like my 2B guy. Cooper's 3 for me here. But yeah, ADP wide receiver 23. Last year he was top 20 in fantasy points per game when he was on the field. Am I saying he's going to be the wide receiver 1? Absolutely not. Am I saying that he's probably gotten pushed a little farther down because he's an older wide receiver who busted on from where he was at last year? Absolutely. Like that was a rough line. Sorry about that.
That's 2 in a row for you.
I've been
2
struggling.
in a row.
This is rough. Brutal. Okay. Woo. Back on track. But yeah, for me, when I look at Cooper Kupp this season, what I'm envisioning, what I see it playing out as is similar to what we saw from Keenan Allen last year, where Cooper Kupp played 55% of his snaps last year in the slot. 55, which means if Cooper Kupp's lost a half a step, in the slot, you can make up for that a heck of a lot easier than when you're on the outside, right? And especially when you're a route technician like Cooper Kupp, when you place a reroll like Cooper Kupp does, that's huge. He still had a 26% target share last year, which I think gets overlooked quite a bit because we think of, Puka was great. He was within 2 targets of Puka when they were on the field at the same time. And he was top 10 in red zone targets in only 12 games on the season. So when you get the ball in the red zone, when you watch Stafford play, he's still the hot read for Stafford. When Stafford knows pressure's coming, it's to Cooper Kupp right away. And, it's going to take probably Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford splitting up for that duo, to kind of fall away. So Cooper Kupp for me, it's, we're a season and a half removed from him averaging 20 fantasy points per game. And that's, that last half season. Do I think he gets back to that? No. Do I think he's the wide receiver 1 in this offense? I think he's going to challenge Puka for it. I don't think he is. I have Puka still statted out to be the better wide receiver. But at the wide receiver 23, I think we're still looking at a guy who's going to, push for 140 targets this season. A guy who's going to push for 1,200 yards. A guy who's a double-digit touchdown threat, every single year. And you can kind of even think of, Keenan Allen, Adam Thielen even, right? Where it's, these are just guys who know how to find ways to get open on the field. They know how to score. They know, they're able to work with their quarterback. And that's kind of the player I see Cooper Kupp as this season.
This Rams offense is just so, maybe not sneaky underrated, but I think they're a little bit underrated for how good
100%.
they can be with Sean McVay, with Puka Nacua, with Matthew Stafford, as you said. And let's just be honest, Cooper Kupp, frankly, just might not have been healthy at all.
Yeah.
Last year. It takes. He's old. These guys take longer to recover. It's just a reality. Ty, you're sitting right around ADP with Cooper Kupp as well. Value or properly ranked?
I lean value. Because I think that there is a world where last year wasn't just injuries, that last year was also Puka's emergence in the offense, and his age. That's the other part. It wasn't just the injury. But that being said, there is a way for this Rams offense for Puka to return on his value, for Cooper Kupp to return on his value, and Kyron Williams to absolutely smash where he's going in drafts. This Rams offense was very, very good last year. And Cooper Kupp can essentially volume his way into still being relevant and to being a value at his ADP right now. And I think I hope people don't think that Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp will work against each other, or that you can't be in on both of these wide receivers. Puka and Cooper Kupp are used completely differently in this offense. Puka is going to be much more downfield now with Cooper Kupp back and fully healthy. And again, Cooper Kupp is primarily going to be utilizing the slot in these 3 wide receiver sets that the Rams utilized the most of any team last year. So Cooper Kupp playing in the slot where he's most effective, Puka Nacua being utilized downfield and after the catch where he is also most effective. These guys won't work against each other. And so for Cooper Kupp, again, he can volume his way into some top 20 status, can maybe even finish, certain weeks, top 15, top 10, even if he finds the end zone. And let's just say this too. Sean McVay has shown his hand in years past that when they get to the red zone, yes, he's now got Kyron Williams there. He likes Cooper Kupp a lot in the red zone. That is not a secret to anybody. So you're getting some sneaky touchdown upside too with Cooper Kupp. So I lean value. I think some people will argue appropriately valued. I think that's fine, but I lean value here.
I just think I'm starting to lean value, and maybe even bigger than what we're willing to admit. I'm starting.
He's my wide receiver 14, so I'm admitting quite a bit.
Yeah, you're admitting. I have Kupp as my wide receiver 25, so that's why I'm I might need to go back to the drawing board here and actually redistribute. Is Puka going to get majority, or is it going to be a little bit closer between him and Cooper Kupp? And I think by the time I go back and make those tweaks, again, he's in this massive tier where I don't have to make many changes to Cooper Kupp. And all of a sudden I could be looking at him, as my wide receiver 13 to 16. And all it takes is me giving him, another 15 targets.
Definitely.
All right. This is your warning for everybody listening at home. Pull over to the side of the road. If you're driving, if you're at the office right now, make your way to the bathroom. If you are at home, grab an ice cream pail, grab a garbage can, anything to catch
Put
the
your hands
vomit
over your kids' ears.
Yeah, right. Just get ready to prevent yourself from vomiting at all costs, because Ty's next player, Ty, just talk about this wide receiver.
I'm doing jazz hands if people can't see. It's Josh Palmer, ladies and gentlemen. It's a Los Angeles. It is a Los Angeles Chargers wide receiver.
I'm gonna have to make a shirt. Jazz hands for Josh Palmer.
Jazz hands for Josh Palmer. Yes. The funny thing here about Josh Palmer, literally in my notes, the very first thing I have written is nothing really intriguing here about Josh Palmer. Okay, I'll admit it. Like,
great argument.
Great argument, guy.
Sold me.
Josh Palmer doesn't have this like league winning upside. Josh Palmer doesn't have like this like gotta have him at all costs upside kind of intrigue. But what he does have is the fact that he might just be the wide receiver one on this Chargers offense. He is the wide receiver that will be on the field the most compared to Ladd McConkey, to DJ Chark. And then I believe their wide receiver 4 is 7th round rookie Brendan Rice. There is
over Quentin Johnston.
Well, man, bust. Anyway, I'm kidding. Quentin Johnson will be on the field a bit too, but anyway.
I had a Brendan Rice.
Yes. I
was going for that up. I'm like, we can't just breeze past that. We can't just leave it at that.
At all of it, I completely forgot about Quentin Johnston. If that should be any indicator of how his rookie season went. But anyway, Josh Palmer has the most rapport of any wide receiver on this team with Justin Herbert. Okay, we talked about Josh Palmer as a sneaky week-to-week upside with flex kind of play if Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were to miss time. Neither of them are in town anymore, and I'm not going to use that as the main argument, but again, that should just show you a chemistry between Josh Palmer and Justin Herbert that is going to continue into this year. This Chargers offense is first in vacated targets with 250. They're also first in vacated receiving yards with nearly 1,800. When you're getting to the 11th round in drafts, there are really only two players, I should say, that are expected to play big roles in their offenses. The first is Brandon Cooks, and the second is Josh Palmer. Everyone else has this kind of fringe flex upside on a weekly, like I might call that tier like better and best ball tier, because you really don't want to start them in redraft or in your home leagues or anything like that. But on the off chance on a random week that they give you 15, like you want to be credited with those points. For Brandon Cooks and Josh Palmer, they are going to be involved in their offenses heavily enough that they do give you some kind of consistency here. We know that this team will want to run the ball, but they have to throw the ball at some point. And I think a lot of people, including myself, are expecting this Chargers offense and team really to be losing in the majority of their games this year. They do not have a great defense yet. I expect Palmer to be heavily featured in this offense, to be the wide receiver one on this team. Yes, Ladd McConkey, when they're going to be on the field together, I do expect a majority of targets to go Ladd McConkey's way just because he is an effective route runner from the slot. But when it is just DJ Chark and Josh Palmer, or Quentin Johnston and Josh Palmer, I think Justin Herbert's going to be looking Josh Palmer's way quite a bit.
I mean, as I'm looking at these guys, I'm just kind of like, well, somebody has to catch the football. Right? We keep talking like the Chargers have to throw the football. They're not just going to run every single play, and I guess somebody has to. Like when I see Josh Palmer at wide receiver 54, I mean, that's just kind of what I think. It's like, I'm okay taking him there, but like, I'm also kind of in the tier of like he's appropriately valued, because I do think Ladd is going to be the primary guy. I do think the slot's probably going to be Justin Herbert's primary read, which will be Ladd McConkey. I mean, again, you hear Brett Coleman talk about it on the Fantasy Pros Fantasy Football Show of, look, you built out this offensive line. You've got one of the most tactical route runners in Ladd McConkey coming out of this draft. How many slot cornerbacks in the NFL are going to be able to guard Ladd for more than 2.5 seconds? The answer is maybe 5.
Mm-hmm.
And my fear is that Ladd McConkey is going to be the go-to because he'll be open majority of the time. It's the easy completions. It's to keep the offense moving down the field and less of the take big shots kind of offense. there is a world where Josh Palmer returns, top 35 value. I certainly think there is. For me, I guess it's a guessing game that I just don't care to play.
Yeah, I think he represents one of the few guys that I think if you draft back in there that you're going to be able to plug into your lineup consistently. I'm not saying he's going to score you 15 fantasy points per game, but if you need a guy to go get you 11 or 12, right? I think he can be that guy on a decent amount of weeks. He had 100 targets 2 years ago. He was on pace for 100 targets last season. But he dealt with some injuries. So I don't know. I think it's weird because you're right. It's not this like there is no home run value here. But I think at the same time, sometimes we have to temper our expectations and realize, you know what? Not every guy you're taking as the wide receiver 50 is going to have home run value. Most don't. Most of this, he could be, like the big sleeper of the year. 95% of those guys don't pan out. So taking a Josh Palmer here is that, okay, I need a guy as my wide receiver 4 or 5 who I can count on week to week, to go and get me some points. I think he could easily outperform this wide receiver 54 price tag, but I also see the downside where Quentin Johnston isn't a bust, where Ladd McConkey, comes out and plays fine, and Josh Palmer is the wide receiver 3 again, and you're left with a guy who has, 75 targets, 40 receptions, and a couple hundred yards. So I see both sides of it. But I will admit I have been taking, a decent amount of Josh Palmer in drafts just to have a consistent piece, in those later rounds.
Yeah. The last thing here with Josh Palmer, if there's a Chargers wide receiver I would prefer to have, it's Ladd McConkey. My worry is this is a Greg Roman offense. A offense that does not heavily utilize 3 wide receiver sets. Yes, we've seen Hollywood Brown succeed in this offense, but I don't think we can just take that one for one and see that Ladd McConkey can be in that role and succeed as well. And so really Josh Palmer is really here just kind of by process of elimination, right? That's the reason for Ladd McConkey. Quentin Johnston, on the chance that he is a bust, that he just is not who, Tom Telesco and his, front office thought he was. And then DJ Chark is, not the same DJ Chark that we were talking about 4 years ago as a sneaky flex option.
He's a dude.
Right. He's just he's a dude. Right. So again, this is more so process of elimination that we're just getting to Josh Palmer, and you make the argument like I made, like he's got rapport with Justin Herbert. He's had success with Justin Herbert in the past. This is not someone I'm actively targeting, but this is a guy that I think if you're looking for options in these later rounds for these wide receivers that have a chance to be pretty effective because of the role that they have in their offense. I threw up Brandon Cooks. I didn't talk about Cooks because I literally talked about their backfield and I didn't want to keep talking about Dallas Cowboys players, but like Josh Palmer is a pretty fine option in my book.
He's not hard to talk yourself into, bottom line. There's a route there, and the route is very convincible that he can end up being a fine value at his wide receiver 54 price tag. Next guy who I think you can talk yourself into being a value is a lot more fun, in my opinion, to talk about than Josh Palmer. But as I look at Jaylen Warren, he is also a guy that I am finding a really easy time talking myself into seeing the path there for him to potentially even overtake Najee Harris this year. I'm not saying he will, but I can talk myself into it at the running back 28 price tag. Look, it doesn't take 2020 vision to see that Jaylen Warren is the more explosive and efficient back between him and Najee Harris. To quantify it, though, because I think that's fun, Draft Sharks put together this little data set of 49 running backs with at least 90 carries last year. Jaylen Warren was 3rd in yards per carry, 3rd in yards after contact per attempt, 3rd in rush yards over expected per attempt per Next Gen NFL Stats, and 3rd in PFF elusiveness rating. He also had only 51 less total yards than Najee Harris last year, while forcing 3 more missed tackles on 74 less touches. Okay? Now, all those numbers are great, but how did this explosiveness, this efficiency actually turned into fantasy points. I mean, he finished as the running back 29 of fantasy points per game, which was one spot ahead of Najee Harris. But you look a little bit deeper, he was actually a top 25 running back in 50% of his games last year. So every other week, this dude was a starter in your fantasy lineups. Now, will things change now that Arthur Smith is coming over from Atlanta? And that's the question that makes everybody cringe. And my answer is maybe, question mark. Because you look at the rush play percentage for these teams last year. I mean, Atlanta was 4th in rush play percent, and Pittsburgh was 5th under Matt Canada. So it's not that these offenses were super different. They both run the ball at a relatively high rate, but we're drafting Jaylen Warren as the running back 28, a full round after Najee Harris, who's going as a running back 24 right now. So if I'm going to take a shot on either of these guys, like, give me the explosive third year back with receiving upside. I mean, Jaylen Warren was top 5 in both receptions and targets at the position last year, instead of this regressing touchdown dependent running back who didn't even have his 5th year option picked up by his team.
Yeah, it's that. So the 5th year option is what gives me hope, right? It was the fact that they're okay. This is the last year of Najee. We're moving on. You know, I mean, unless they sign him for less, but it's not like they have some investment in him. But it's just, I don't know. I've been burned. I have Jaylen Warren high in my rankings too. I have him as like my running back 19. And
Welcome aboard.
I'm just so, I don't take him because I don't want to deal with Arthur Smith.
Yeah.
I'm so nervous that Arthur Smith is going to look at this offense and go, Najee looks more like the running back. Arthur and Jaylen Warren looks like a change of pace guy, so Najee gets the ball more. Like that is genuinely my worry, because he did it with stinking Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson, even though it wasn't even close who the better running back was. And so that is my concern. And just my worry for it. But it is, good to see that Atlanta ran the ball a lot last year. Pittsburgh ran the ball a lot last year. They're going to continue to run the ball a lot last year, which should mean, that Jaylen Warren will have plenty of opportunities, even if Najee is still the lead back in this offense.
I'm in the same boat. I really don't want anything to do with any Pittsburgh Steelers this year. Coming firsthand from a guy that, opened up his heart to be hurt by a guy like Arthur Smith.
Artie.
That being said, though, like, Pittsburgh has upgraded their offensive line. Like, their offensive line is sneaky underrated here. And yeah, like, George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth seem to be like the top pass catching options that aren't coming out of the backfield. But, like, is there a way where Jaylen Warren kind of like backdoors his way into top 20 status just on the back of receptions because there is no one else? Like, that is a possibility here. Like, that has to be at least acknowledged. So you can be in the boat of like, I don't want anything to do with these Pittsburgh Steelers, but like, you do have to kind of admit that, like, sure, there is value here. And I don't think any of us are going to be sitting here going like, oh yeah, like, Jaylen Warren's got like top 15, top 10 upside. That's not what we're saying at all. What we're saying is you're looking at some of the guys that are going in front of him, and compared to Jaylen Warren's situation, what he could produce, Jaylen Warren as the running back 28 is a nice little value, someone that you can wait on in these drafts and feel confident. I don't know if confidence is the right word to use, because we are talking about Arthur Smith offense. You can feel good about him as a depth piece. I'll say it like that.
So Jaylen Warren is one of those guys where, again, in all of my underdog draft lobbies, you come to that tier where it's like the running back 18 through the running back like 28, basically, where they all go within 2 rounds of each other. It's just like 10 running backs go in 20 picks. And every time it comes to Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren, I sit there and I look at them both and I go, I got to increase my Najee exposure in best ball formats. And I don't do it because I look at Jaylen Warren and I say, you might actually be the better NFL running back right now. Like, I don't think that's crazy to say.
Yeah.
So if we're and to go back to the top 5 in targets and receptions, and again, kind of backdooring his way into top 20 status based on receiving work alone. Let's quantify top 5 last year. The man caught 61 of his 74 targets. We typically don't see those kind of numbers unless if you're a workhorse back. So you see more of a split between the rushing work potentially. You see this opportunity in the receiving game for Jaylen Warren. He just, at running back 28, I don't see why he should be going a full round after Najee. And I think you could easily see their ADPs and finishes flip-flopped at the end of the year, where Najee Harris is actually the running back 28 and Jaylen Warren is the running back 24.
Definitely.
We'll put a bow on it there.
Beautiful.
Anything else you both want to add before we wrap up the episode?
Real quick, I am sorry for putting you all through my Josh Palmer argument.
Oh, now you say it. You couldn't have decided that before the episode?
I was being genuine, and now it makes it seem like I got peer pressured into talking about Josh Palmer and apologizing for Josh Palmer. I'm kidding.
You have nothing to apologize for.
No, you definitely
you
do.
are.
No, you on the far, you on the left. You need to just pipe down. You know what? 2-minute minor. I'm going to mute you. Okay. I think the point here that I do want to make is that there is value like all over your drafts, right?
Yeah.
These are just the guys that we find the values to be. You might, you at home might be sitting around and going, I think Zamir White is a great value. Sure. We'd love to hear your arguments. So drop it in the comments. Like, we want to hear from you. We want to hear who your values are. No, you're not done yet. No, you still have 30 seconds. You are muted for 30 more seconds, sir.
Brutal.
This is weird for the audience because they have no idea like how I'm doing this. I'm just muting Lucas so he can't actually talk over me. But again, we want to hear who your values are. Let us know in the comments. Let us know.
And if you do comment below, now that my 2-minute minor is over, now that if you do comment below, hey, look, make sure you subscribe to the channel then too, because you'll be entered to win potentially a 2024 Fantasy Football Fellas draft guide. Again, we will be doing that. We'll be giving away one to a person who is subscribed and comments down below on the video you are watching on YouTube every week on both of our episodes for the entire month of July. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you turn on those notifications as well so you know when each video comes out. You can come comment below and enter yourself to potentially win a draft guide. If you're listening to the audio podcast, we're so grateful for your support over there too. I know we've been talking a lot about the YouTube transition, but we're grateful for your constant and steady support over there as well. If you do want to support us a little bit more than you already do, you can hit us with a subscription over on our new YouTube channel at The Fantasy Football Fellas. You can catch us on the socials as well. FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on Facebook, and the beloved TikTok. I am at Lucas Wenzel on Twitter, at CamLawFFF for Cameron, and at Tyler_Plath. We're coming back next week. We got a mock draft and sleepers for you next week. So again, make sure you subscribe, comment down below your valued players and fantasy football drafts this year for a chance to win the 2024 Fantasy Football Fellas Draft Guide. We will see you all next week. Deuces.
Deuces.